everybody, how's it going? Stout Man coming back at you once again, and as you can see, I'm kind of off to the side here in this corner. You know, I'm always trying out new angles. This one seems kind of interesting, so why not? Today I'm going to be talking to you about a movie that my good friend Brandon Skinslip here on YouTube recommended to me. He said he thought I should check it out, and so I went on Amazon and I put it on my wish list, and I waited for it to go down to a price that I was comfortable paying because it was only available on DVD. The reason he wanted me to see it was because it was based on the life of Kurt Cobain, lead singer of Nirvana. Nirvana being, of course, a big name in the grunge era, and I am a huge fan of grunge. I grew up in Washington around the time that grunge was becoming popular, right? And at first I didn't really get it. At first I didn't really enjoy it. But, as I grew up and surrounded by this music and just throughout the 90s and even into the, early 2000s, you'd turn on the radio and there would be Nirvana and Stone Temple Pilots and all kinds of grungy music, essentially. So, needless to say, it kind of left an indelible mark on me. It left its mark, and it's one of those genres of music that I have developed an appreciation for. And really, I've spent a lot of time, trying to figure out what exactly it is about this genre that makes it interesting and special to me. And I've come to a few conclusions about the genre, which actually, in this movie, were, in a roundabout way, confirmed at least a little bit. Because there's something about Nirvana that is uniquely, well, I had to say uniquely different, but it is. It's different from all the other grunge bands out at the time. There was a lot different about what Nirvana had going on than what they had going on. Just saying that it wasn't exactly a selfless act. It wasn't exactly coming from somebody who was entirely about his art and entirely about that, not making money at all, and didn't care about making money. In fact, hated it. That's the image that I see portrayed of Kurt Cobain so frequently, is that he's this guy who hated money, he hated the music industry, he hated everything about what Nirvana had become, because Nirvana had become big, and he didn't want it to be big, he wanted it to be a small thing. It's like, no, actually, he kind of did want it to become big. He did want that. That did actually end up happening for him. And in this movie, they go a long way towards actually delving into that aspect of Kurt Cobain's life and of Nirvana even. And it's funny because this movie explicitly refuses to say this is supposed to be Kurt Cobain. They don't name him Kurt. They don't name the band Nirvana. They don't even mention the band, although there is the band members are in the movie. They shy away from all that because, well, I'll explain why later, but for now, let's just show you what I picked up. Last Days. This is a Gus Van Sant movie. Gus Van Sant is a great director. He does, you get the sense that he does movies, like, not necessarily great movies, just kind of so-so movies. And he does those movies so that he can be able to do movies like this, like Elephant, like all the other artsy stuff that he's done in the past. And honestly, this is actually, Last Days, is, as I was noting, was a lot like Elephant. There are a lot of scenes where you're following people around and not necessarily, just following them around. You're like a fly on the wall kind of thing. And it's really interesting, and I love that directorial choice. The cinematography in the movie is really good. A lot of people would take issue with it, though, because it's cinematography that is not typical. In fact, I would say this movie has a lot more in common with, French New Wave movies than it does with anything American that has been produced in the past 40 years, honestly. I mean, This movie is really disjointed, just incredibly disjointed. It's more about the themes going on and what you're actually seeing and trying to decipher what it all means, and you know, it really does feel like a French New Wave movie when you're watching it. And the fact that it's not doesn't necessarily deter from that. It's different. It's like what an American would do if they wanted to do French New Wave. And it's probably heavily inspired by the French New Wave for all I know. But after watching it, I went online and read up about the movie and discovered that actually, for this movie, Gus Van Sant went and he's been trying to get this biopic made about Kurt Cobain for years, since the 90s, since it happened essentially. And he has been he's been in touch with Courtney Love, and he's been talking to her for years, and he had been talking to her for years, and he had been trying to, not just get her on board with the idea, but to try and get some concept of where Kurt Cobain was at that time in his life, why he would do something what he did, and just what was going on in his life at that time, what the situation was, and how, he's just trying to gather information in order to be able to do a legitimate biopic about Kurt Cobain. But at some point he just decided, you know what, not only is Courtney Love not going to give me the okay on this one, but he just decided that he's not going to make a direct biopic about Kurt Cobain, and instead he did this, which is very much based on the life of Kurt Cobain, on his friends, on all the people in his life, and all the things going on in his life around the time that he passed away, during his last days on Earth. So when you keep in mind that this movie, without necessarily naming Kurt, without necessarily saying this is Kurt Cobain, actually giving him another name entirely, it doesn't explicitly state that this is Kurt Cobain, but the idea is, yes, it is, because it's a rock musician who sounds and acts a lot like Kurt Cobain, living in the Seattle area. And yeah, honestly, at times, the character Michael Pitt, who played the Kurt lookalike essentially, Michael Pitt really came across in the movie as almost Hunter S. Thompson-esque, because there are scenes in this movie where he's running around not only in a dress, he's like wearing a dress, he's wearing a jacket over that, and he's wearing like these army boots, and he's got this hunting rifle, and he goes busts into somebody's room while they're sleeping, and points the unloaded gun, I might add. Unloaded gun. I believe it was unloaded at least. I thought I heard a click at some point this is unloaded. But regardless, he just goes into their room, busts in there, and just, starts taking fake shots at their head with a shotgun. And it really seemed like something that Hunter S. Thompson would probably do. You know what I mean? Just something crazy, weird, off the wall, Maybe Michael Pitt's characterization of Kurt here was a little bit influenced by that. Kurt was definitely an eccentric kind of guy. That being said, there were a lot of interesting themes in this movie that I really dug. One of the big themes was apathy. There's all of this, just everyone in his life is apathetic about everything. They just don't care. They don't treat him like a human being. They don't treat anyone else like a human being. They don't even treat themselves like human beings. They just don't care about anything, and they don't do anything of worth for anyone. And yeah, it's just this, you get this feeling throughout the movie of apathetic hopelessness, and it's, it's very fitting for the subject of the movie, because the subject of the movie is about a guy who, it's supposed to be biopic of Kurt Cobain without necessarily being a biopic of Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain, of course, being a grunge rock singer and artist. Grunge, of course, being very, in style, very apathetic, very, depressing. So I felt like the themes running through this were really cool in that way, and they were really spot on, and without necessarily showing the explicit drug use that was going on clearly. They did a really good job of showing us what somebody would look like if they were that hyped up on drugs, essentially. So this is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, I will tell you that right now, because several times while watching this movie, I distinctly got the sense that if I tried to show this to anyone, except for like huge film buffs, they would probably hate it. And some of them might even say it's not even a movie, because it definitely does not fit the typical role that most people have come to expect of a film. There's no happy ending at the end of this one, obviously. There's not even really a build-up to it. The point isn't necessarily to, come to some conclusion about what happened. The point is instead just like a reflection or a character study of the man himself. So, yeah, it was definitely interesting, and it was really cool to go online and discover that apparently he had Gus Van Sant had worked with Courtney Love for several years to make this happen, essentially. I mean, this isn't exactly what she wanted, I'm sure, but after talking to her for so long and getting as much information as he could out of her, and determining that she was still so distraught over Kurt's death that he just couldn't do that and instead had to do this, I feel like, there was a lot of respect paid here, and on top of that, it was also a very cool character study of the guy. And another thing that I got from this was there were a lot of folk themes throughout, like folk music, and that was really cool to me because I've always felt like grunge music is heavily folk inspired. A lot of people say only a little bit, even some people say not at all. Some people say no, it's a post-punk thing. And you're not wrong necessarily, because there are elements of grunge, especially most grunge overall, most grunge music, that are most definitely inspired more by the post-punk thing going on at the time, the punk music at the time, especially the way the songs sound and the way they were written and all that. But what I was talking about when I mentioned that Nirvana's music is different from other grunge musicians and grunge artists at the time, what I meant by that was that their music is a lot more folk inspired. And it really shows, actually, obviously he was really into the folk musicians of the time. Grew up listening to a lot of artists who were inspired by folk musicians, and at one point, even in the MTV Unplugged Nirvana session that they had, he says that he was approached to buy Leadbelly's guitar. So I don't think it's too out of place. And at the end of the session of that, he plays a folk song in a grunge style. So I don't think it's too out of place to suggest that there is a heavy folk influence, especially for grunge music coming from specifically Nirvana. Because if you actually listen to the lyrics and the lyrical structure of Nirvana's music, not all of it, but a lot of it is actually like, it's the way that folk music was written. It's very much inspired by folk music. And that's not to say that Nirvana was the only one doing this. If you actually go and listen to early Pearl Jam, like before they were called Pearl Jam, and then if you listen to some early Stone Temple Pilots even, a lot of people say Stone Temple Pilots isn't actually, They aren't actually grunge. And to a certain extent, you're right, Stone Temple Pilots, towards the end of the 90s, became something very not grunge. They were starting to become like indie rock more than anything else. And in fact, if you listen to the later stuff from Stone Temple Pilots from like the late 90s or so, like the mid to late 90s even, if you listen to that stuff, you will hear a lot of things that you eventually ended up hearing in like indie rock from the mid 2000s. So yeah, they were influential on indie rock, to put it bluntly. But if you listen to the earlier stuff on, I believe the album is Purple, there's a song called Pretty Penny. That one is extremely influenced by folk music. And then I believe Silver Gun Superman is slightly as well. And then on number 4, which was again late 90s, but there was also Atlanta, which I felt like was also very folk inspired. So yeah, there's no reason to say that there weren't any other grunge bands that were like Nirvana, that there was no way that anyone could sound like Nirvana, or that Nirvana was the only grunge band doing folk-inspired tunes. Because that's absolutely untrue. The truth is that most grunge, or at least a significant portion of grunge music, was heavily inspired by folk music. So I don't know why I had to go on a rant about that. I just felt like it's something that every time I try to bring it up into discussion and say, actually, this was a huge, significant portion of what grunge was, I always get told that I'm wrong. And it's like, no, actually I'm not wrong. If you actually go back and look at the history and actually look at how the lyrics are structured and how the songs are written and all that stuff, you will determine for yourself easily, yep, this is folk inspired. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Most rock music is folk inspired in some way, and if it's not folk inspired, it's blues inspired, which I would say that grunge, and especially Nirvana, was inspired by both folk and blues. But there was a certain apathy of like the generation that Kurt represented, Generation X, I would say, that was really on display in this movie, and I kind of dug it to a certain extent, but I also dug that it kind of confirmed some of my feelings about the music itself and about the people doing the music and all that stuff. And interestingly enough, here they have on the cover, "Rock and roll will never die." So that I feel like is a double-pronged commentary, just that right there, because people like to say that grunge is dead, even though, okay, it's kind of more of an underground thing now than it was back then, but it's not necessarily dead. But that's a popular thing for people to say, grunge is dead. So there's that commentary on that. And then on top of that, the commentary here, rock and roll will never die. That's a line from a Neil Young song. I believe it was Hey Hey My My. Yeah, rock and roll will never die. Does anyone remember that? Neil Young, of course, being a folk rock singer. Anyone? Folk? But yeah. Enough of trying to instill my personal beliefs on this entire genre of music. All I will say is that this was an excellent movie. Very artsy, though. So if you're not into that kind of stuff, then maybe avoid it. I don't know. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I think you should check it out. This video is running way too long, so I'm going to cut it off now. Thanks for watching. Catch you later. Peace.